So, welcome to another workshop of Center for Language Excellence. My name is Esther Hamdi. If you don't know me, I'm the Director of Online Language Education, but it doesn't mean that I only am the technology expert, which I'm not, by the way. So, basically, besides doing my work for CLE, I'm also the Dutch instructor. And when I was still teaching in the Netherlands, I was also very much trained and involved in didactics for learning, teaching the language as a second language and also as a foreign language. So hopefully that will come in handy today. But interrupt me if you think you have a question. I hope we can learn a lot from each other. And well, I'll see. I assume that everybody already has an idea when you see what the topic is for today. So the difference between a learner-centered, a doggy, a learner-centered against a teacher-centered environment in your classroom. So, and it's more about maybe a philosophy, I think, and a technique. So I hope we can learn some ways how to make it more learner or student oriented. Although you might think that's what I'm doing already, a learner oriented class, right? So, and last week I was at a roundtable discussion about how to create a lesson plan. And one of the things that came up was how do you motivate students to do their work? And because there's so many students in my classrooms anyway, and probably in yours too, who have to fulfill that language requirement. They're not there to learn a language, they want to just fulfill and check their language requirements. So many things today might be also very important for that, how to motivate the students. Also about flipped classrooms. When I talked about flipped classrooms a couple of years ago, many people said, not here on campus, but somewhere else, they said, that's what language teachers do. It's always flipped. Maybe not. But maybe everything will be linked, right? To flip your classroom, to make it more learner-centered, to make it also, what was the other thing I thought about? Okay, so it's maybe coming all together, because if you make it more learner-centered, it might have the same effect that it's more motivating for your students to take your class or keep and stay in your class and be very active. So today we will do that. So is a language learner not a language student in your class, not a learner in a learner-centered classroom at all? I'm sorry, I have to check my notes today. It's Friday afternoon and my brain is not working that clearly anymore. So what do you think? What is a language-centered or a learner-centered, a learner-centered or a teacher-centered classroom? Do you think you are teaching your students from the perspective of a learner-centered classroom? Or do you want me to go over the basics? What is the difference between the two? Okay, another thing that came up last week, so I'll start in a couple of seconds. Another thing is that many people complain, in a way, the language instructors, about a very tight scheduled curriculum, that there is no time to do nice stuff, that there's no time to do a learner-centered maybe approach, because we have to go through certain steps what is written down in the curriculum, written down in our syllabus. So I'll go for that too. First, let me check. I can do that from here, right? Yeah. Okay. So why would you consider this, in my idea, a technique to make your classroom more learner-centered. There has been a lot of research, not only specifically for language learners, but learners in general at schools, at high schools, in higher education, all over the US. And the basic outcome of that research was students are much more actively involved in the program when it's more learner-centered. It makes sense when I think of the name, learner-centered, so you focus your attention to the learner specifically and not only what is in the textbook or in the syllabus. So they say this is what makes it really desirable to teach in a learner-centered environment. So you don't have any passive kind of students. So you don't have the students, sorry, I have to do it like this. You don't have students who are falling asleep in your class or getting distracted or not paying attention. And as you can see also, the setup of this classroom is not really learner-centered, right? There must be a professor or somebody talking to the students, and one of them is writing something down, can be something completely different, and others are falling asleep. So they say in a learner-centered classroom, the students will be the most active people in the classroom, not the instructor. The students will be active, and not in a teacher-centered classroom, because they say then happens what you see here. Not only are they not paying attention, it might be what I refer to as subtexting, texting on their cell phone below the table, so they think you won't notice. But they say, and in that case, when the instructor is talking only, mostly, then the students might be a sponge, but it's not very effective. So it's more about what do you do in the classroom, or specifically what do you have the students do. So the key is maybe more on communication when it comes to language than only to perfection, that everything has to be perfect. So what is the difference? Let's see if I can get there. So you have teacher-centered, and I'll give you some ideas. So the goal is for the teacher to say, okay, I'm an expert maybe in the language, or it's my mother tongue, so my first language. So, and I can tell you how it works and how you have to do the exercises. So I will be the expert in the class, and I will tell you what you need to know. And often also there is, especially in certain syllabi, it is, okay, this week we have to cover past tense, or we have to cover the passive voice or the subjunctive or whatever. So there is a reason what you have to do in class. We have to go through this because you need to master that part. So the focus is more on the objective. What do you want students to be able to do? They have to be able to use the rules in, for instance, a conversation. And learner-centered is more, okay. Learner-centered, that's a little bit far from me sometimes, is you focus on what do the students want to do. And now you can also tell me, okay, but my students are not interested in doing stuff, they just want to fulfill the language requirements. So they don't care, even if I ask them, what do you want to do? They don't care because they want to just check the box, I fulfill the language requirement. So somehow you have to shift that around in your class. You have to look at what is their interest. And of course many of you have a textbook, but still you can tweak that a little bit so it might be more better for their age group, to name one. And there might be a lesson plan. We have to cover certain stuff, but maybe it's flexible. One of the first things I always ask in all my classes, no matter if it's a beginner or an advanced class, what are we going to do today? So I have a plan, but I want to make the students more responsible for their own learning, and maybe they say, well, we don't have to discuss the different past tenses, we just want to speak. Very hard, what do you mean you want to speak? So the difference is that for a learner-centered classroom, it's more on can they do what they have to know, so are they able to communicate, are they able to in a new scenario, in a new way, can they come up with what you need to do as a student? So can you use the past tense? Can you use this and that? In, for instance, teacher-centered, it would be, we are covering the spelling, we're checking that in a beginner's class, we're checking the numbers, we are checking, do you know the questions and answers to introduce yourself? That's more teacher-centered. Learner-centered would be, okay, I give you a scenario. I always refer to it as a scenario. I give you an idea or a couple of ideas. You are, I mentioned that a couple of weeks ago, you're at a party in the Netherlands at a new introduction at a university. Go around and are you able to introduce yourself and ask who the others are in the classroom. So that's more, a tiny bit more learner-centered. However, I have to say this and probably need to repeat that later. It doesn't mean, I think, in my opinion, it doesn't mean that you have to have a learner-centered classroom 100% of the time. That's why it's a technique in my book. So you don't have to do it 100% of the time, but I've been sitting in on many different language classes many times here, and so far I have never been in a classroom when I thought, okay, let's say at least 50% was learner-centered. No, most of the time it's still 80 or 90%. The teacher will decide what you do in class. So 90% of all the classes I saw, all those classes have for 90% more of a teacher instruction than it was student-centered or learner-centered. So that's what I think. Yeah.
2 questions. You probably want to explain more. If you say it doesn't have to be 100% learner-centered, then what percentage are you thinking that it should be teacher-centered as opposed to learner-centered? Then also you seem to be using learner-centeredness, learner-centered, and learning-centered. Can you please explain? Or if you are using them interchangeably?
Yeah, they're not 100% the same, right? So, but maybe I should focus myself or restrict myself only on learner-centered. That might be better. The percentage, well, you tell me, what do you think? How much should be in a classroom of, let's say, 55 minutes in a regular first year class, first semester? Do you think you need to be the instructor many times? What do you think? What would be the percentage? Maybe we can go through a couple of one exercise and then see that you know exactly what I mean by the difference between teacher-centered and learner-centered. And then you tell me if it's possible to have it 100% learner-centered. I would say it should be, it could be 20% teacher-centered, but I would say no more. But it might be hard, so we'll talk about that first. So what I want to do, because as I said, my brain is not working and my mouth is not working, so I have a couple of things. Maybe you can discuss with each other, is this activity, this is kind of, let me check where my cursor is. I'll do first this, right? So for instance, this is on your plan sometime during the week, it can be on one day. So you want to explain all the different past tenses or only one past tense. Let's restrict ourselves to one new past tense. So is that teacher or learner-centered? And if it's teacher-centered, do you think of a way how you can transform that into more learner-centered? That the students are more responsible for what they are supposed to learn that week. So as you can see, I made it that far away, so I think you can still read. So explanation of the past tense sounds teacher very fast to me, teacher-centered. Fill out the sheet when you have to put in the right tense. Ask and answer questions in past tense. Walk around and ask questions and report back to the group. write down in one paragraph what you've done this last weekend, and there is a poem about everything in past tense, about everything that can go wrong in one day for one person in that case. Can you talk to each other and see what you think, okay, that must be teacher-centered, and I don't see another way how you can do that. Maybe you think an explanation has to be teacher-centered. Or is read out loud the poem, is that teacher-centered or student-centered? So I walk, you talk in groups and tell me what it is in 10 minutes max. I want to discuss them briefly if you think it's fine, but I'm not going to discuss them. I hope a couple of you can say what your group was saying about this and why, and if you could think of a way to make it more learner-centered. But please react to each other. Maybe it's nice if you only say your first name and the language you teach. If you teach a language, right, or if you take a language. So, about the first one, who wants to talk about explanations of something? Can be past tense in this case, and can be first year, can be second year, third year. Who wants to start things off? Yes.
So we were saying that an explanation of grammar is usually going to be very teacher-centered, but my name is Amber and I teach French. And so what we try to do in our classes with things like the past tense is to have them look at different sentences and then try to pick out a pattern, and then they can reflect on this for 30 seconds or with a group and try to figure out what the pattern is in the sentences that we're providing, so that we are not just explaining grammar but actually co-constructing grammar together.
So more integrating the theory and the practice. Want to say another word? Yeah, okay.
So, hi everyone, my name is Kashika Singh and I teach Hindi and Urdu in India Studies program. So we discussed the first question in our group, and I think it's a mix of both teacher and learner center. I don't go over the grammar in the class. Like I expect my students to read grammar chapter at home the night before. So they are expected to read it and come with their questions or notes. Next day in the class, I'll ask them what is past tense. I mean, I'll write it and they'll give some examples. And I have a grammar. I have a handout, of the whole chapter, just shrunk, with more important points. So I just write it and the students will respond. So I think that's the way how I test them if they really read it. That also counts for their motivation, their homework, their preparation. So I think that's a mix of teacher and learner-centered question.
May I ask one
Yeah.
thing? You say you expect the students to read it. Do they?
It depends. It depends, and I think because I don't go over the explanation in the class, they read. Because the ones who have not read it, they are passive, and it's quite embarrassing also because language learning is a team. So they are not engaged with other students in pair of activity. So it puts pressure on them.
Very good. I would say never give in to explaining it to everybody,
Yeah.
and half of the
Yeah.
students have read it. And about the Socratic way of learning, right? That's always a good one, right? Give examples and then distill the questions themselves. Any other responses to this? Any concerns or? Yeah.
No, my name is Nina. We talked a little bit also like giving examples and teaching the grammar through examples. And I don't think that I would expect them to read the grammar before class, but maybe after class. So you would give examples and through questioning and answers and making them through the examples realize the grammar that you're trying to teach, and then maybe on the homework
thing, they would have the explanation that they could read through or work on. Because then they already have the structure kind of built in their head, and now they can see it, the whys.
Why it is okay. Okay, but is that teacher-centered still or learner-centered? Or is it a mix?
I mean, if we do the activity they mentioned there, there is the student's discovery of the rules. That would be learner center. You set up the structure, well, we're going to do the past tense, it's not that they can pick whatever they want to do. So there is some structure, but still they recognize the rules. It's their work.
They have to be active,
Yeah.
right? Okay. Any other concerns or questions or remarks about this?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Also, different adults, different learners will learn in different ways. I don't do so well with trying to figure out the rules on my own, and I do much better if I know what the rules are, and then I can practice and practice and practice. So if we did an activity where we were trying to figure out what the rules were for 5 minutes, I can be lost for 5 minutes and hopefully get something from the other students. But if it was for 30 minutes, that means I'm going to be lost for 30 minutes, and that's much more difficult for me. So just be aware that there are different styles for different people. And if you know your class well enough, then you can have a balance of a variety of styles.
So that's where I think the grammar notes that we're supposed to read before the class helps, because that one
Yeah, I would do very well in that
discusses
class.
the.
One of the assignments in my class is that I ask students to submit their grammar notes of that chapter.
Yeah.
So that means, and it doesn't have to be like 2 pages, it could be just a paragraph. So, main highlights of that helps.
Yeah, and you never want the student to be lost for 30 minutes.
Correct.
Or
Be sensitive.
then they will be sleeping or depressed. Yeah, but that's right. There are how many? 8 different ways how people can acquire knowledge, right? So, and what works for you might not work for me, and the other way around, right? There's so many different ways of. They don't want to miss. What was the name of the guy who came up with the 8 different? Gardner. Yeah, Gardner, and he says, well, they're not learning styles. It was just precisely. So he was fighting against that people in the nation are saying it's learning styles. He said, well, that's not the case. It's an article 2 years ago, 1 year ago, Mr. Gardner. Yeah, but it's a good point, Mr. Gardner says. Okay, then fill out the sheet with a short story in past tense. So we've covered the past tense, and you give them a short story, and on the blanks you have to fill in the right past tense. Who can I ask to respond to that? Nobody?
Maybe if we can ask the student to come up with a story of their own and then write the story in past tense. If it would be just a 3 or 4 line story, it would still be a story.
Yeah, so then the story will be shorter.
Yes.
And
It would
doable.
be his or her work.
Okay. So because this one, how it reads here on the screen, that would be very teacher-centered, right? And I sometimes check this and ask students, okay, and they fill in the tenses and they do that the right way, but then I ask, what does it say? And they have no clue what the story is about. They only know how to do the trick. I would say grammar is a trick. About asking and answering questions. Nobody?
I think, we discussed, and this is learner center. You have given the guided questions, but they're asking, and then they're going to respond, So it's again a mix. It's a combination.
Could you also think of that the students have to come up with their own questions? Then they can show again what they know, right? So you can do a mix, but you can also give them the responsibility to come up with the questions.
I think in that, when sometimes when there's no question, it demotivates the students who slack, you know. So I think in the beginner, this seems like they are just learning. So there needs to be like some question, maybe 4 or 5 questions, and then they can build.
Maybe, some students, we have different levels in the same classroom. So maybe pairing them together when students, they know how to write question or how to say questions with other students, that will maybe, and if the questions are not provided, that will be learner centered. So it's good to bring their own questions orally, and that's why I want to ask, pair students together. You have very good students and you have students flip out, they prepared how to form questions the night before, they came to classroom, they have to know how to do it. Some of them they didn't, for example, or they had, hard time to know, to form questions. So do you think, pairing them together as groups and put, one really good students with many levels, that will be, still it's learner center, but will affect those high level students, or? Anybody
Yeah,
else?
sometimes, the high level students don't like if they mix them always with. In some cases you can do this, but don't do this always, you too. They say, right.
That they feel that they'll be behind or something.
I think it's possible to, you can sample them in a way of providing them with a few questions in the beginning to model it for them. And then and even if you have more advanced students, you can have more advanced questions that you might give to them separately or even have on the same page to show and have it demarcated out that this is a more advanced thing. If they want to try it, they can make up their own questions that way. And that way, you're not always punishing the advanced students by putting them with the lower level students, as some may feel. Others might really enjoy the teaching experience of being able to share it with what they know with their peers and show off. But then at the same time, you might have the lower level students who are also maybe slackers and are just going to ride off of the more advanced students. So by paying attention to who's doing what in the classroom, you can change your groups around or change your partnerings around and try to balance that with a different type of modeling activity for each style, I guess, or each personality.
Yeah, you don't want the slackers to become even more slackier.
Right, they'll just feed off everyone else.
I actually give this exercise for my first year elementary students for Yoruba. I teach language, it's Yoruba. And usually the way I do it, I would not give them this exercise until they've learned question forms in the language. So then I will give them an authentic text, maybe from the newspaper clipping, which is easy for them to be able to understand, like, depending on, it could be just a short announcement about date, where, what the name of the, person, just simple information like that. And then I would just ask them, based on this article, ask questions. And my students always like it, and I never provide, I won't provide questions for them, but that's after they've already known. They've learned how to form questions, because I feel if the teacher is the only one asking questions, then they won't be able to, ask. So this is always, and I do it, even in first semester.
I teach Estonian Guy. I think the activity really varies depending on where you are in the sequence of just being very structured or form focused, or being more able to do meaning. But even what I like to do, if I'm still very form focused, if I'm actually providing the forms to use, let's say past tense forms, they're not yet able to form them on their own. So I provide the questions, I provide them, yes/no questions and answers. Did you do this yesterday? Yes, I did. No, I did not. It's very, very given to them. But I also ask them to do a third turn, to ask them a follow-up question. Where did you eat? With whom? Something that they already know. Make it more conversational. It's still very, very structure-oriented, very teacher-centered. Question-answer, but there can be something additional. Why did you not do this? Where they can make it more conversational while doing grammar practice.
And a day later, you can even say, okay, now you are me, right? Now you ask the questions, now you take over.
No, that would be like a pair task, where they have the questions and the answers given, and they have to do this, but also add something of their own.
Yeah. Okay, then the one number 4, walk around and ask questions. So ask 3 students in class, if you have 3 students.
So if you have one student, what?
Yeah, oh, okay, so ask yourself, where did I go?
I mean, I just say, I mean, we discussed differently, but walk around and ask about summer break. Is it the teacher or
It's
the
the
student?
student.
Yeah, so then it is, it's still learner-centered. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's still learner-centered.
Yes.
Yeah. Even if I, as the instructor, tells you, you have to walk around and ask questions, still it's the teacher who decides what to do, right? But okay, I'll come back to that later. So that's the most learner-centered activity in this list, maybe? What about the one paragraph? And I only frame it by last weekend, but then it's open, right? You can talk about what you, if you went to a movie or if you saw some friends. So is that teacher-centered or learner-centered? And if it's teacher-centered, how can you make it more learner-centered?
I guess we were saying that they are still producing, and so even if it's a quiet production and you've given a prompt, they're still producing actively, and while writing that paragraph. So it's still centered on the student and centered on the student's experience. If you then ask, but you could make it even more if then you ask them to share with a neighbor, then they could interact with other people. But the actual act of producing something creative or thoughtful it seems to us to be student-centered.
Yeah. Any other input?
Esther? Oh, I'm sorry. Can
Go.
Dinara, I teach introductory courses here. I think I also agree that it's a production and it might be learner-centered. Also, it can be changed the task that one student writes and gives that paper to another student, and another student may read and retell that in the past tense that she went, she did. And at the time it would be more learner-centered.
Okay.
You know, what I was going to say is we were talking about having them in pairs or in groups and telling their stories instead of writing them down, because we were talking about having them in silence for I don't know how many times. In a language course, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So that would be better if maybe they're in pairs and ask each other about what they did last weekend, and then they report to someone, or you have to, while you interview your classmate about what they did last week, and then you write down what they did and report, maybe you know.
And that's one of my colleagues in Germanic Studies says silence is the death of the classroom, right, a language classroom, but still there's some moments here and there. But if it's very quiet in a language classroom, it's many times not the best, depending on what you're doing, of course, or letting the students do. And reading out loud, this is maybe more passive because the text is handed out to the students. Is that teacher or learner-centered? Can it be learner-centered? The last one, the poem, you have to read out loud.
I think it can be learner-centered if you ask them to, put the right intonation, the right tone. But that we need to analyze the text and understand it and draw on that in order to really, act it out in some way. So there would be analytic skills from the learners involved there, I think.
And how will the whole group contribute to that? Or will be the teacher saying the intonation is, you should pronounce this word like this and not like this? Because then it would be teacher-centered again. But you could make that learner-centered also.
If you have them read in pairs to each other and then they correct each other's intonation and pronunciation.
Do you activities like this and like the others, the peers are deciding if it's good or wrong or help to correct things?
Often. Yeah.
And what is your experience, what do the students think of an activity like that?
I don't know if I use poems, but I often have students pair off and then they have to do a pronunciation, if they're doing a pronunciation first, example. Then like when I was teaching English, this French students had to know the difference between wing and ring, and so they would say wing, and then the person would have to flap their arms, and their partner would have to say which one it was, and then if it was a ring, then they'd have to show a ring. But you can have them do this with the whole text, or you can have them do it in just one word, but things like intonation, you can have them say what they've understood when the person is pronouncing things, and then give the feedback in that way.
And what do the students think of activities like that?
It's often fun, and they think that they realize that it's hard to hear and hard to understand and hard to produce. I mean, so it really makes them think about what they're trying to say and how they're supposed to be saying it. They're not being corrected by a teacher, but they're understanding how difficult it is and where they need to make their efforts in order to be understood better.
And can it also be counterproductive, that they make wrong corrections, that they don't help the right way?
I
If you have to think about it, and the answer is no.
I think it's quite nice to have people correcting each other, and then of course you have feedback or you follow up, and you can see how they've done it, and that has to be a little bit teacher centered when you give them feedback on what they're doing, what they have been doing in their groups, but and if they've got it wrong, then you can correct it at that point.
So this is somehow focusing more on pronunciation maybe than on past tense. Any experiences you want to share with everybody here about what you think works well and is very learner-centered? Because I think as long as students are very involved, they like it better than sitting in class and waiting till 10 more minutes, right? Any experiences about learner-centered activities like this for speaking or past tense or whatever?
I was going to say, just piggybacking on what she was saying, maybe some people in here find that uncomfortable to have the students kind of judging each other and they might be incorrect, or putting them on the spot where they have to sound funny and embarrass themselves in front of other classrooms. But I feel like if you build a great rapport in your classroom, then they're comfortable doing that in front of each other, and you can manipulate it in a way that they're always interacting and they're having a good time while they're doing it. And I've even done with college-age adults who are true beginners, who are always going to be fumbling over their pronunciation, just to have them constantly throughout class, not just for speaking, but for every activity, having them check in, having the teacher checking in with everyone to ask, is this correct? What do you guys think? And then they're not embarrassed anymore to say, yeah, that's right, or, ooh, that's not so good. And even to do it in ways where if something was right, if the students agreed, if it was correct or if they agreed, I would have them say, ding, ding, ding. And that sounds childish, but even for adults, they get into it. And if it's not correct, they go, dang. And at first you're like, oh, that's going to be embarrassing. But after the first few times, all of a sudden, everybody knows we're all on the same team, and it's going to be fine. And when the teacher is constantly having them go through every kind of activity, for grammar, for reading, for whatever, they know how it goes, and they're okay with it, and they're not afraid anymore to produce in front of everyone. And you can do the wing and ring sort of thing, and it works out beautifully.
Well, both of you say fun, that's very important. Important motivator to learn a language.
My name's Kelly and I teach French. And one thing my partner and I talked about is, as stated on the slide, there's no real motivation in there. So why are we reading this poem, for what purpose and to whom? So we've talked a bit about pronunciation, but if we were hoping to read that text for meaning, You can make it more learner-centered by letting the learners either compose the text or choose the text. And then there would have to be some kind of task that those listening would be listening for, some motivation for listening. Either because they're interested in what their peers have to say, or they're listening for some specific information, or along these lines. So I agree that we would never hand students a poem, that we would choose ourselves and give it to them and have them read it without there being a more defined reason for doing this, and motivation for doing it, and motivation for listening as well as reading.
That's very important. So actually I could think all of those can be very teacher-centered, all of them, without any question. Or you can make all of them learner-centered by just saying, okay, we covered the past tense last week, so that's why I mean you don't have to do it every single lesson, right? Not every single session in class. But you can say, okay, we studied the past tense, we did this, we did that, and you know how to form it, you know hopefully how to use it. So when they come to class and you say, what is still the most difficult thing for you? You are still having problems in telling a story in past tense of last weekend, and you too, you sit over there and you talk about that. You want to focus more on this or that, so you break them out in groups, what they want to improve or what they want to test, because it's all about they will be responsible for what they are trying to learn, right? And what they are trying to learn, they want to make it their own, and they want to make it more personal. You can do that easily. Well, easily, it's not easily, but you can do that. So I think I have to go back first. This is what they say, right? So teacher-centered is more what I'm doing right now. I'm talking and you are all listening, and dozing off maybe. And the students, they take notes. The students were mostly alone. That's more maybe the lecture type of classes where they have to go to a culture class and take notes most of the time. And the teacher, that's why I asked who is correcting the pronunciation. The teacher is walking past. Is the teacher correcting the responses, yes or no? I would say only if they ask me to, and if you hear something very crazy, then there are ways too. But you don't have to be the person who is correcting all the time, right? They say also you can provide feedback that's more important maybe than correcting on every little detail. So, and the students, they are very well able to answer questions, right? If somebody has a question and they ask their peers, how do you do this? There's always somebody who knows what the right answer is and how to do it. And they have funny kind of ideas how you can master certain aspects of the language. And the biggest difference maybe in this, when you see the teacher, and now I come back to the syllabus, we have to cover this and that and that, and there will be a quiz or a test or a final or anything at the end, and you have to do that. You have to be able to do that. And I will be the judge of that if it's correct. You can say that's at the end, the final, but in between all the quizzes, everything, it's up to you. And Canvas, I come back to Canvas, you have beautiful things like peer review options, right? You can ask students to evaluate their peers' writing or speaking. So you can do that easily in Canvas. That's a nice thing of Canvas. And how you can set it up too is that you say, okay, the students, they evaluate each other's production first, and they look at a certain rubric, and they say, okay, this is done well, and this is okay. And then the teacher will be the second one. It's always about who's first. Here the students are first, and maybe the teacher is the coach. Here the students evaluate, and in general, they're very good evaluators, maybe a little bit more harsh than I am. So they are very good in making it very hard for each other. So you have to give feedback on that too. But this is what they basically say, right? You have to work in pairs, but if you come to class and you say, this is the activity, talk to each other, then it's still teacher-centered, because I say that you have to talk about this topic. So you can give them the choice. That's the good motivator, that you give them a couple of choices where they want to talk about, or about what they want to talk, and then you have them talk about the topic they like best. And that's very hard to know exactly what every student, they have their own interests. So this is very important too, that they think about themselves, that they know, okay, I have a hard time with this, how can I improve that? Not that they say, you make a lot of mistakes here, this is an exercise to improve that. They have to come to that conclusion. And in my experience is that students are much more capable of doing that than you might expect. That they're much better in knowing if nobody else is listening, they know much better what they are not very good in. So I would say make them more responsible. That's the whole difference, I think, between learner-centered and teacher-centered thing. So to come back, this is what we've done. So you have to be more active, right? And not only you say what activities they have to do, but you can give them many choices and tell them, you choose the one you would like to do. And they decide how they want to do it, with whom they want to do it, and they are more responsible for what they want to improve. And in a teacher-centered environment, there are often only a couple of things, because how many things can you do during a 50-minute class? But for a learner-centered classroom, you give them many options. So that has to make you creative too, right? Because you have to think about a lot of different scenarios. But the more choices students have, the better they can pick the one they would like to do together. And it always, most of the time, I cannot say always, but most of the time it works out fine for students or learners. Those two I mix too. Many people say learner-centered, and I sometimes say student-centered. Of course, the students have to work in pairs or in groups, and not only in the classroom, but also outside the classroom. That works best. I cannot hold their hand all the time, right? So they have to do it themselves. And what they have to do more is not just reproducing what they learn in class and everything you have in the textbook. They have to come up with their own production and make it more personal to them. And then the evaluation, it should be more, I think, the student or the learner who's saying, okay, good job, whatever you would say, and then the teacher. Because I always say to students, I know when it's correct, yes or no, but try to think of it yourself. In the Netherlands, they have the nickname, what do you think? I always ask them, what do you think? And never supply the answer. And even from societies, I had Polish students, and they said in Polish society, you have the teacher, and you have the students, and the teacher decides what's correct, yes or no. But I always said, what do you think? What would be the best option there? And well, it worked out fine. Nobody ever said, well, you are the teacher, you tell me what's correct. So, never had that. So, it's more about evaluating your own production. What do I need to know about, what do I need to improve? I need to improve a lot in my English, right? But I'm not going over that today. So, any other things? Maybe we can do for a last activity today. We can talk about what is the best thing you think, how to make it one activity. It can be about a topic, can be about grammar or vocab or a combination. What do you think? Like the ding ding and the dang, right? Those are very helpful things, I would say. Can you think of a specific activity which would be very learner-centered and would be very well, it can be a beginner's level or advanced or in between. So think about one of the things we can tell each other which would be very useful to use in a language class. I'll give you 5 minutes for that. Any good ideas? And of course it makes a difference if you're having only one student or 20, right? So that makes a huge difference. But for me, being the online person, it doesn't matter if it's online or in class. So any interesting, bright, new ideas how you can have a very nice, active learner-centered activity.
This is a request, not a comment, but does anybody have any examples of effective teacher-centered or effective learner-centered activities in an online situation? Not a distance situation, but an online situation. Do you want to share any?
I can share an example connected to that. I was in the role of a student there, but I studied like history of literature, and we had this course that was kind of a role play course. So every time we had a different time era, and then we had to select a character that was somehow related to the time era, and then the characters would discuss in a manner or kind of like take influences from the time era. It was really interesting. So it was, yeah, you were kind of creating all the material for the classes.
I personally hate role plays, but I find out, I really hate it, but I find out that students love it. Especially here in the US, because I think I don't have to tell my own opinion, I can pretend I'm somebody else. And this was a time period.
Yeah, you could really just like get in your role and just, yeah, say things within the role. So you could be like, I could be a male French author in the, I don't know, 1800 or something. So you can like take another person's perspective and
the good thing is you put the question in the lap of the student, right? They have to come up with who and what they want to do. And what I always tell, and that's why I always tell the students, I'm a very lazy teacher, so you come up with what you think you would like to do. So, and that amazingly works much better than when I tell them things. Well, this would be a one, right? This is, okay, you select the person you want to be in which time period. Students somehow are very active online when it comes to Dutch, so but they do that most of the time themselves. They come up with solutions.
So we could do this like whether in a Skype session with each other, or what would you use?
Yeah, Skype or Zoom. You can use both. And what they do is, I like to have a map, for instance, from the Netherlands, and they pick a city and they find out all kinds of materials or interesting sites to see there and contribute to that website. So if somebody's going there, so give them a lot of free choices, kind of, because Netherlands is limited. So and they have to talk to me what they want to do, and they come up with all kinds of interesting websites they can add. So ask them, would you like to do something? I always give them at the beginning of the semester many choices, what they want to read, what they want to do, and they may choose whatever they like best. Well, that's not really a very good answer, but one of the answers.
No, I just had an example because I took a sign language online class, which was very interesting because I never thought that sign language we could do it online. And one activity that I really enjoyed was after we were taught many concepts and sentences, they would have short videos from different people, and you would choose which one, in what order you thought it would be the best dialogue. And then the students could discuss after that why they think that person was,
why they would choose that order. And then I thought this was a good way of getting everybody involved with something that's difficult to have online.
Online, sorry.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
For my online class, something that I like to do in the Adobe Connect is to just have them do breakout sessions when they're going to be talking in pairs. And it took me a while to figure that out, and so I don't know, maybe everybody else has that already figured out. But just to give them, when I do it, I have a set of slides that is ready for them. It says breakout session number 1, like you have 5 minutes to complete the next 5 slides, and maybe that's it's sort of teacher based in that I'm giving them directions and what to do, but then they pace themselves and they kind of work through it together as pairs or in groups of 3.
So you don't have to leave them completely free, right? You can give them some input and some suggestions, but then it should be their own idea what they would like to pick and do. Yeah.
So you could give them 3 slides and say choose one of the following activities to do. And
yeah, exactly. Choice is very important for motivation, right? If they see something and I think, no, not me, but then hopefully in the other 2 they have one that is better for them.
So Esther, what do you do for feedback? Do you say, create these things and do it just for practice and no feedback is given? Or do they give feedback to each other, or do you give feedback on the online?
First they have to give each other feedback, so kind of a peer review, and I give them kind of a rubric and what things they have to concentrate, and then of course, you have to give feedback. Without feedback, that's anarchy, right?
They're not learning.
Yeah, exactly, so you have to. But I prefer if students themselves give feedback to each other. And if you give them a rubric on what they have to think about, then it's not like, okay, this is perfect, I like it, well, very well, because you want to have more structural feedback. And they are doing that very well. If you give them a rubric, rubrics is another option for a workshop. But it's very important, feedback is very important for both the student and the instructor. Any other ideas, that side?
I had a good example. I was taking this Dutch class with me and one other student, and we had a situation in which we learned different ways to give your opinion on what you think about things. And so instead of like necessarily saying that's correct or that's false, if I give a response, then the teacher can ask my fellow student, what do you think about that response? And they can, instead of saying that that's true or false, they can say, I agree because, or something like that. And that's a nice way of, like, everybody benefits that way, I think. The other student can use his or her experience with ways to give opinions and things like that.
And for opinions, as I said, I hate role plays, but when you have a statement, I give them a plus or a minus. So they don't have to choose. Faith chooses if they will have to answer in a positive way or a negative way. And that's a tiny version of a role play, but they like that because then they can go wild in their negativity or positivity. So the last thing I want to show up. Yeah, I have to look at the myth. Some people say it can only be in small classes. That's the main idea about learner-centered. It has to be in small, so I think then that the teacher has some control still. Others say it's only possible in large classes, although I heard here and there already they can see the downside of large classes because teacher thinking, how do I control what is happening in class, right? And it can only be not in freshman classes, and that's not true. It depends on, you have to give them some feedback how to do stuff first before they can do it. But if they know what's happening in your class all the time, you don't have to explain it that much anymore. So Ms. Bloomberg is doing a lot about teacher-centered. So there are many myths, the same with Socratic way. So now my last thing before I ask Laura to say something. Any questions, specific questions about learner or student-centered teaching? I hope it gave you some ideas that you sometimes have to think of the other way. Not only how would I learn a language, that's a very problematic thing sometimes, because how you learn a language can be completely the opposite of how a student would like to learn a language. Any questions?
Did you list those based on the article that they are needs because you believe it could be done? Any classroom, whether big or small, graduate, undergraduate, could be a learner center.
All of them. And even if there are only 2 students or 20, it can be freshman level, can be graduate level, can be any level. It's maybe easier on higher levels because students are probably sitting in your class because they want to learn. But not easier, but it's not at all impossible at a freshman level.
Just an example, I used to teach English for children who was like 6 to 10 years old. And you can do that even with children. You can have them choose, so today do you want to talk about animals, colors, or food, and then they take a vote, and then you choose, I think you can do that with any level, any age. You can